you were recently, well, you were banned on Twitch
A couple years ago, yeah.
a couple of years ago, and your appeal just got
It gets
denied?
rejected every 6 months, you know?
Oh, you try again every few months. 'Cause I saw like online somewhere that it was like last week or something. Your appeal got denied.
No.
You don't know why you were banned, right?
Not officially, but I've got like friends that I think I know why I was banned.
Oh yeah. And what did they tell you?
I think it was because I was fighting with, it was a time on Twitch when there was the big debate over trans athletes, not just for Twitch, obviously, it's for the entire United States.
Right.
And my position has been that like if you've gone through puberty and then you transition afterwards, you probably shouldn't be competing at NCAA level or higher.
Sure.
And then I obviously would get into lots of fights with lots of people over this. And I think I uttered something along the lines of like, don't waste your time arguing with trans activists on Twitter. They're subhuman. It's not worth it. And I think that apparently that comment got interpreted as me saying like all trans people are subhuman or something. And then they stretched that into like a hate speech ban. I was like, oh,
yeah.
Okay.
But they didn't tell you why. They just
well, when the email comes, it just says you've been indefinitely suspended for hate speech or hateful conduct. I was like, okay.
But you do get to appeal once every 6 months is the idea. Do you think they'll ever reverse that? I mean, it just seems
not unless the culture there significantly changes.
Sure, which could happen at some point. You know, we sort of see this Twitter shift take over, and suddenly, I will say that when Elon Musk took over Twitter and everybody was saying it's going to become this like right-wing cesspit, I did think to myself, come on, like you're not even going to notice. It's like a change of ownership. Like who the hell cares? But I must say that Twitter has recently become
they're only like 50%, right?
It's like right. It's a totally different beast now. Like I like opening Twitter, I can feel like something shifted in the air. Something like that could happen at Twitch. I don't know, but don't you think it's a bit outrageous that they can take away someone's livelihood without even needing to tell them why?
I mean, I would obviously say that. Yeah, of course.
But like, because that, you know, a lot of people like to debate the whole sort of private company publisher thing. Like, should social media have should it be legally bound to protecting free speech and this kind of stuff? But this kind of question really, really brings it out, because in a sense, you think, well, there's no real way that everybody who ever gets banned for anything, we don't have the resources to put a full sort of investigation, inquiry, and human checking of everything they've ever said and done. But it does seem like for people of a certain size on the platform, people who are significantly depending upon it for their livelihood, like these companies hold so much power that it does feel like they should maybe begin to occupy a different legal category. I don't know what you think social media companies like are in this debate about sort of, you know, publishers, private companies, sort of pseudo new public squares. Like, what do you think social media platforms actually are?
I mean, I think they're private companies. I think they have the right to do as they wish. Now, obviously, there's a difference between what do you have the right to do versus what ought you do. Everybody has the right to lie and cheat on partners, but I mean, should you do it? Probably not. Private companies probably should have the right to ban who they want and not ban who they don't want to. I do agree that it's a little bit scary that like the public square has obviously moved on to social media companies, and there are certain political strains of thought that, at least, especially over COVID, was probably when it was the worst, that seemed to be getting like deleted from a lot of public spaces. And there's a legitimate question to ask about, you know, what does your right to speech mean if you have no platforms on which to speak? I think there's a legitimate question to be asked there. But I think the reason why we don't hear about this too much is because, one, I think these companies do largely try to stay within the realm of appeasing like 98% of people. Like, for as much as I, you know, don't like being banned and all that, most people that get banned from these platforms probably need to be banned, right? Like 99% of people that get banned need to be banned.
Sure,
like if you go through for every like one, like, oh my God, that was so unfair. It's like people spamming the N-word or whatever crazy stuff. And then it seems like when there's enough blowback, I do like that social media has kind of like tended more towards the community note or like the little YouTube note at the bottom, as opposed to just like straight banning content or delisting it. So hopefully it continues to tend in that direction.
Are you signed up to be one of the reviewers of community notes? I remember when community notes first came out, I clicked some button or something which they were looking for the people who actually come up with them, right? And I've never contributed, so they should probably get rid of me from it at some point. But it means that I see about 10 or 15 times more posts that are community noted. I see suggested community notes. Are you signed up for this as well? Do you have this?
No, but a lot of people in my fan base are, so I see that. Yeah, and you can like.
It's so fascinating, man, because what you're seeing people argue in real time about sort of what a sort of fair bit of context is, and they're often just sort of calling each other like slurs, because they're just like, you're just being the stupidest person I've ever heard. This is obviously not necessary for a note or something. It's really fascinating to see what people actually are debating as relevant there, but it is always just going to be some arbitrary decision that people make as to whether something is needs noting, whether it should be banned, whether it shouldn't. And I think to myself, like, I'm thinking about like the development of governments over time and how there was a time when there was basically just rich people and poor people, landed people and serfs. And at some point, people just decided there's this sort of institution, this thing that we're sort of calling government, the people who govern, right? And we just think there's something so significant about the fact that they sort of own this public square. They own the land that we all live on. They own the spaces in which we interact, that we should just come up with these special rules about this particular organization and institution that say things like, they're not allowed to tell us, what we can and can't say. They're not allowed to tell us what our, beliefs are going to be about religion and this kind of stuff. And people just agree that because this institution is so powerful, it needs certain rules. And this develops over a very long time. And eventually we sort of come to a rough agreement that there are certain things that governments can't do because of just the nature of what a government is. It's a very particular kind of organization. I'm thinking social media has been around for like a couple of decades. And it's already proving itself to be so significant that in this debate about, is it a private company or is it not? I feel like there's maybe space for beginning to treat it as its own unique sui generis type of organization that is a bit like something that does own the new public square. And because of that, it seems too straightforward to just say it's a private company, it can do what it wants, especially because social media is not, people often call it the public square. It's not the public square. Because the public square, you don't get to control who comes in and out. You sort of show up and there you are. It's like a public square that you, without even realizing that you're doing it, sort of only allow in a certain kind of person who'll interact with you in a certain kind of way. I mean, these algorithms are infinitely more intelligent than we're possibly capable of understanding. And so as much as you think you're sort of, I'm trying to follow people from every side, I'm trying to engage in the debates, it knows how many milliseconds you spend looking at this and this. It knows how you sort of interact with it. It knows what you like. And so it's not so much a public square. It's like this self-reinforcing walled garden that keeps out everything, not that you don't like, but that you don't sort of engage with and interact with and want to interact with in some way. This is like a unique beast, surely. And I feel like just saying like, look, man, it's a private company. They should be able to sort of ban who they like. Feels like it doesn't take into account how serious of a shift this is in the history of our species, really.
I think that when the United States was being created, I think that you had a unique opportunity in time where you had incredibly intelligent people coming together to basically build what they thought was like the best type of government possible. This wasn't done strictly by democracy. You didn't have a ton of peasants and ordinary people just voting on every single provision in the Constitution. You didn't have a ton of people that didn't really know why they were there, giving opinions on what should be or what shouldn't be, included in, the federal government and in the Constitution. You had like a very intentional process by people that were working from first principles to try to draft what they saw as a government that would execute on the things that they all collectively felt were the most important things to execute on. And I agree with you that I think that social media's companies, I think the internet in general is kind of like a paradigm shift to where we're accelerating and moving in ways that are a little bit outside of what's happened over the past like 150, 200 years. And that as part of that paradigm shift, I think it's pretty easy to argue that our current like structure of government and the way that we approach legislation doesn't really encapsulate well how to deal with these things, right? Like, well, should a private company be forced to host a certain type of speech? We probably shouldn't be able to force them to host a certain type of speech. That makes sense when the private company, is like 2 offices and a couple cities. But it's interesting if you get delisted, if like 4 companies don't like you, you essentially have no voice, right? Like if YouTube decides that you're banned, if Twitter decides that you're banned, and if Facebook decides that you're banned, that's like probably like 80% of like your reach, or depending on what field you're in, it could be like 95% of your reach. It's just completely gone. I think that the issue though is that when we go to, there's like 2 things. We can either kind of like try to squeeze it into our current legislative framework, which is essentially what we have to do because we're not going to go back to the drawing board. So we either squeeze it into our currently existing framework, or 2, we try to kind of like redesign the framework a little bit to make it more adaptable. But the issue is that now we can't work with a group of learned people from first principles. Now we have a democracy that I don't know if 80% of the people in the United States even know why we have the things that we do have. So how can you possibly argue for anything relating to what a company ought to look like when this country is torn in half over what free speech ought to look like, or what a private company ought to look like, or what a collectivized, set of rights ought to be, how they ought to be protected or doled out to people. So Yeah, I think that because we've spent so much time not really defending the foundations of our country, like, is liberalism good? Do we need to go to more like a populist government? Is capitalism evil? Should we be more collective? Like, because we don't even have answers to that, how are we possibly going to come together to create a framework from one of those first principles to deal with the social media companies?